Welcome to the End the Silence podcast. I'm your host, Sandra Payne. As an RN and holistic wellness coach working with nurses, I am uniquely positioned to hear the struggles, the deep passions, and the stories of nurses, our silent heroes. Many nurses suffer with burnout, depression, anxiety, PTSD, substance abuse, and suicidality, and they do so in silence. Nurses are the ones we turn to for help when we need it the most, and this is a heavy burden for them to carry. This burden, the pervasive bullying and unsupportive culture of our healthcare system, means many nurses have lost their voice. These are their stories. My guest today is Jane Van Brunt. She is a nurse and corporate healthcare leader and the host of the Dear Spin Sisters podcast, a podcast about mothers and daughters, nurses, and storytelling. She's the author of the Nightingale Gene and the co-author of Shut Your Mouth. She published the Nightingale Gene in 2018 as a love letter to nurses and caregivers, and was somewhat prophetic as she wrote of her fears heading into 2021. Not realizing the mass exodus of nurses due to retire in the US would be exacerbated by the pandemic. Jane learned the hard way what stress and burnout can do to a body when she was diagnosed with Guillain-Barré syndrome and was paralyzed for 2 weeks. She coaches nurses to look for less stressful ways to use their degrees, running workshops to identify business opportunities that support their mission to reinvent themselves. I'm so excited to have you here on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit, we'll just dive right in about yourself and, what's been your story to get you here today?
Yeah. So I am, in fact, a baby boomer nurse at the tail end. So I was born in 1962. So I'm kind of the tail end and then joining in the Gen Xers a little bit. But it's been a strange position to be in because my mom was so young that she's very close to being a baby boomer herself. So, and also a nurse. So I grew up in a really small town and I fortunately got a scholarship to go to nursing school in Seattle to a 4-year degree. And that really changed my life. I think I would never have left that small town if I hadn't been exposed to the big college town in the big city of Seattle. And I stayed there for most of my career. I was a bone marrow transplant nurse in the early 80s, which was all very experimental. So sort of an eye-opening experience. My first residency was at Harborview in the burn unit. Saw a lot of electrocution, a lot of the first, second, third degree burns, just really kind of an eye-opening experience to be in that big city with all those injuries. And then took bone marrow transplant as my career for a long time. And we did a lot of research on dogs first and then on people. And it was not what I expected of that holistic nurse that I imagined either. I was used to rocking babies in the nursery at the local hospital. And so this was kind of shocking for me, but we were also saving lives. And so in the middle of all that, we came up with a cure for CML. And now people who have leukemia, for the most part, are cured easily. And so those were our early experiments in Seattle. So I spent most of my 15 years early in my nursing career in oncology and bone marrow transplant. And then I moved to outpatient into a large, at the time it wasn't that big, but it was a home infusion company. So we were doing a lot of patient education in the hospital to get them out of the hospital. And then we would go home and take care of them at home and then teach them how to do their own infusions. So in that way, that felt very, to me, empowering because patients didn't want to be in the hospital. We figured out ways that they could be home and we really liked that. So I spent the next 20 years in what started out as a very small infusion company. It was purchased by CVS Health, which is a huge corporate monster here in the United States. And I was working for CVS or shortly before they purchased us when I got sick. So corporate jobs, very different for nursing. To your point, though, I never thought of nursing as in a box. I always kind of refused to stay on the floor and to work beside burned out nurses and to just have that disengaged population. So I pushed the boundaries from the time I was pretty young and got out of there. And so then that way it was fun to be at corporate, but it was a very high stress job and very different than holistic nursing. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Tell me a little bit more about that. You said like before you got sick. So was that the paralysis that happened that you're talking about?
Yeah. So I tell the story in my book too. It was, I don't think that nurses or women label themselves as being burned out. It's like a badge of honor somehow. Like, if I ask nurses, are they burned out? Or if I have this burnout assessment and I want them to do it, they're like, it's like, it's almost embarrassing or something to say, yeah, I'm really burned out. So I think it's just part of our nature to be function that way, unfortunately. So I was burning the candle at both ends. I was in a big corporate VP position. So I had over 100 people reporting to me. 65% of them were nurses. I also had dietitians. And so we were a very clinical company, at least in my division. And I loved what we were doing. It was part sales, but it was a lot of education. And I was part of the training group at corporate. So I would go every 6 weeks to train new nurses. So I was really loving what I was doing, but it was taking a toll because I was traveling all over the country, in hotels, barely sleeping, couldn't go to sleep because of the time change, and eating and drinking more than I should be, and it was all on the company. So I didn't even think about what it was doing to me. Not exercising enough, even though we, at the time, every time I was home, we were really big road bikers. And so it was like I was living two lives. I was at home, we would go to France and Italy and bike. And at work, I was barely sleeping in hotels and barely exercising. Mm-hmm. So I think I was pushing my body on the weekends because we would go out for 50, 60-mile bike rides every day and try to get ready to go to Europe. And I was just pretending that that I was energetic enough to handle it. So I got sick one winter, planned a holiday party, planned a New Year's Eve party. My son was home from Boston, and we think he brought home the swine flu, because he was very, very sick when he got home. And then my husband got it, and then I got sick. And Guillain-Barré, it's not proven statistically, but there is a link to viruses, but there's also a link to vaccinations. And so one of the first questions they ask you is, have you ever been vaccinated? And I was one of the holistic, I suppose, nurses, women that didn't believe in antibiotics, didn't believe in vaccinations. Our bodies are meant to fight things, and we need to fight them off. And so I had never really had a flu vaccine. So it wasn't linked to that. So they linked it to this flu that was going on the East Coast in Maine or Boston. So I got really sick, and I was fine. I thought I did think it was the sickest I'd ever been. I went to the doctor because my feet and legs started tingling, and that seemed really weird. It was a sinus infection. I had bronchitis. I knew all that stuff, and that was getting a little bit better, but my feet were weird. So I went in, and it's a rare disease. It's not so rare anymore because of these strong viruses we have. But they said my tingling was probably because of my white cell count and just because of my flu. So I went home, and 24 hours later, I was by myself. I had sent my husband on a ski trip we were supposed to go on, and I couldn't walk up the stairs, which was really weird because in my brain, I was trying to make my legs move, but the muscles weren't working. And I didn't think twice about whether I could make it in the car. I just got in the car and drove to the emergency room, and I made it. Didn't hurt anybody. And then it moved pretty quickly. I really, really bad pain because Guillain-Barré is your body is attacking yourself, and it attacks the muscle sheath, the myelin sheath around your muscles. So it basically eats the sheath. So the nerve pain is pretty bad. So they thought it was MS because Seattle has a high incidence of multiple sclerosis, but it wasn't. It was Guillain-Barré. They do that by spinal tap. So I was pretty zonked out because of the pain for days. I was in the hospital about a week, and then I went to rehab for 2 weeks, and slowly, started to feel my legs and stuff. Guillain-Barré is an ascending disease. So it starts at your feet and it goes all the way to your head. And some people are on a ventilator. because it impacts your diaphragm too. They now have IVIG, fancy drug for Guillain-Barré. And so I was given that and did have to learn how to talk and swallow again, but did not have to be on a ventilator, thank God. Mm-hmm. So I was focused on my team, the whole time. I wanted to, we had a national meeting coming up and in Florida, and I wanted to be there. And so I was doing extra work with a physical therapist. I was doing on the bars, trying to walk. I was still in a wheelchair when they wanted me out of rehab. And I had planned on going to the national meeting in a wheelchair. That's how focused I was on work. And so I hadn't really learned a whole lot from what stress can do to your body or burnout. So I didn't go to the national meeting because my boss said, you're not going to the meeting. It's across the country and you're going to stay home. So, but I did go back to work after 3 weeks, and that was kind of crazy. And now that I think about it.
Yeah, that's quite the story. And, I think one that, maybe people haven't experienced exactly what you've just shared, but to some degree, when I think of all the nurses, and, I do think it's because we're predominantly women in this profession, the amount of nurses that I talk to that, we get these little signals. We know we're pushing it. We know we're getting the signs, we hear the messages, but yet, whether it's shame, probably big time shame, the expectations we hold on ourselves and what others hold on us. And then the stigma too of if you can't hack it,
right,
what kind of woman are you? Right. If you can't handle this all on your own, what kind of woman are you? And so we hold it in, and, we keep pushing until our body is like, time out. Like you can't push anymore. Right. And we get sent this big boom, and it comes in so many different forms. And I talk about this a lot because I see it so many times of the little things that are creeping in. It's like, we could listen to this now, or sure, we can wait. Maybe it's not pressing right now, but eventually it's going to. It does for everybody. It's like inevitable that something's going to happen that's going to kick you back, because it's not sustainable. We are not meant to be, we're human beings, right? It's not doing. So, but it's just, I think a lot of our cultural conditioning and just all of those pieces that I just said. What do you think kind of was driving you to just keep pushing, keep going, even though your body was like, no?
I think you nailed it, that power through it, that the women that can do everything. I raised 2 children. I was working full time. I was making a lot more money than I ever thought I would make as a nurse because of the jobs that I took. But that, along with that, comes a lot of stress. Fighting with my lawyer husband because I wanted to work, just a lot piling on. And then the kids had gotten to the point where they were headed to college. And that's when I got sick. That was right at the same time my husband decided he didn't want to be a lawyer anymore, and just one day said, I'm out. And so I come home from these trips and he's in his underwear looking at the computer, and it's just freaking me out because all of a sudden I've got 2 kids in school, in expensive schools, and I don't have a husband working anymore. And it just, so I think that, we do that. And I think the shame, I had to struggle a lot with perfectionism, which in the end is just shame based. It wasn't going to happen to me. I was the leader of all these young women. And I was the one that stayed the latest at these parties to make sure no young woman got in trouble or drank too much, because then something bad could happen or they could lose their job. And so I was the mom, and moms don't get sick.
Yeah, moms don't get sick. Well, the thing is, we do.
Right?
Just newsflash for anybody listening. We do. We get sick, and we get sick hard sometimes because we're not paying attention to ourselves and doing what we need for ourselves. It was
interesting. I learned when I started to study Guillain-Barré, it isn't weak, sick people that get that often. I had a patient in bone marrow transplant who got it. He was the first, I'd never even heard of it before. So I was only like 21 when I heard it the first time. But when I researched it, it's doctors, it's triathletes, it's marathon runners. So it really, there is a link there to just how much can you stress your body.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. It is kind of fascinating how much we can. And then equally fascinating how our body recovers and how just innately, naturally it knows how to reorganize and rebalance things if we give it space to do so,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So tell me a little bit more, like even going past that, where did you come to a point where you did say like this is enough. I can't keep pushing myself like this.
So it took me almost 10 more years. So it's been 10 years since I had Guillain-Barré, but about 5 years ago, I took a big leap, and I think it was this little voice that kept screaming at me. I could hear it. What are you doing? You made promises to me. You weren't going to work hard anymore. You're going to take care of us. And it just kept getting louder and louder. But it was so fear-based that I could imagine walking away from a corporate job and walking away from a paycheck, especially when my husband wasn't working.
Mhm.
So there was a lot of guilt around that too. But then one day I just got really, it was just a wake up call. It was around remembering that and going on a retreat and writing a bunch about my childhood and why I felt, we were a bunch of farmers, ranchers, work hard, nobody rests,
Mhm.
not even on Sundays. But it took me a long time, but that's kind of the wake up call was, if now or never, because I'm pushing, 45, 46. And we'd gone on a trip to Europe biking, and everything was starting to make me realize that it didn't have to be this work, work, work thing, that there was more to living, and watching Europeans and how they live and how they take care of themselves, and how beautiful it is there. And it's just so calm. And so then I would come home, and there'd be this stark contrast to corporate America and airplanes and waiting in line and people coughing. So after the retreat that I went on, I wrote a book about my life, and it had a lot to do with cooking and being a jeweler and being an artist mainly. Um, and I didn't publish that book yet; it's still in the works. But with that, I decided to write a book about nurses, and I had been talking to a friend of mine about why I was worried about 2020 and baby boomers, and the fact that nobody was going into becoming professors. So the universities were struggling too. So there was just this huge problem. It started from the beginning, not enough nursing professors to teach young women, not enough women that wanted to go into it, too many burned out nurses being mean to young nurses. So I couldn't leave it alone. And so I decided to write the second book. And that's how I think you and I connected with Meg and Joe. I went to Author Incubator to write my second book, and basically applied using it was actually called Spin Sister, my first book. And Angela said, yeah, no, not that book. That book is a memoir, and it's really sweet. But if you want to make a difference, write a book about where you think you can make a difference. And so that's where the Nightingale Gene came up. And even the title of the book was really around the studies that I did on Florence Nightingale. And it's no wonder that we're not that far off of the Crimean War. We're in the trenches, and we're battle every day, and we, don't care if there's blood and mud on us. And so that was the title of the book, because of, Florence and the gene that I think we all inherited.
Yeah, we talk a lot about trauma, and how there's different streams of trauma that we can experience, of course, but collectively and as a culture in nursing, there is significant trauma, right? And
Mhm.
even woven into the traumatic experiences is also the expectations and the beliefs that are wrapped up into the profession, and how,
Mhm.
yeah, we look like how many years later and we're living the same thing, and we're unwinding these same recordings that have happened
Mhm.
already. And if you if you dig into trauma the way I do, and particularly collective trauma, is that we are bound to repeat it until we
Mhm.
learn from it,
Right.
until we start to do something different. It's just going to keep happening. So here we are,
Mhm.
right? So tell me a little bit more about the book. So it's called The Nightingale Gene. You did it through the author incubator, which I think is just so serendipitous there,
Mhm.
just that connection. And Megan Jo Wilson, who is a coach I worked with as a coach. So she's a coach
Mhm.
for coaches, just a remarkable female empowerment leader.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so tell me a little bit more about the book and, kind of what's the message in the book and how has that whole process gone for you?
Yeah. So it was published in 2018. So prior to the pandemic and prior to even, what happened with the baby boomer piece. But it was really, I did a lot of research and so some of it's data driven. It talks about why burnout, why nurses aren't going, why women aren't going into the profession with all the science piece of it. How we've lost kind of the art of nursing with the science of nursing. And so I just talk about my own experience and why I believe that happened. And just kind of a warning that it isn't always about burnout as far as I hate my job. Sometimes it's burnout because you want to just keep making more money and helping more people and doing more things. And so I was pretty driven. And so I wasn't at all burned out as far as thinking about I hate my job or being disengaged. It was physical burnout.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really just a lesson about, we're the nurses that are older, are we really still eating our young? Because that prompted my book because I had still seen I started to look at Instagram, even though I'm too old for Instagram. But I knew my kids were on Instagram, and it was a lot of young nurses were on Instagram, and they were referencing the fact that older nurses are still being pretty mean, and that I'm going to a new hospital. I'm not going to let that mean nurse treat me that way anymore. And so it's just very angry, kind of mean comments that were being made. And so I talked about my own experience, and I did not experience nurses eating the young where I grew, where I was. I always thought about it in terms of we could kill people. So, the older nurses were very solicitous of us and very careful about how they trained us. But we were infusing bone marrow that was harvested from some place in Europe. And if we did it wrong, we could kill somebody. So they were pretty black and white about how we had to do our nursing, but it wasn't mean, and it wasn't I'm burned out and I don't have time for these young whippersnappers.
Mm-hmm.
So that it was just really, I call it a love letter, because I was really just trying to say, please don't let the burned out nurses hurt you. Please be in the profession. We need you. We've got too many people retiring. Please, professors, go to school. So it was really just, I guess it ended up being a warning, because I was worried about 2020 and I had no idea. Now we're in who would have even imagined, because even when I did the research, nurses were staying in the job on average 2 years in the United States. So we were already not doing a good job with young nurses. And then on top of it, now doctors are leaving, experienced nurses are leaving. So the book did talk about, it has steps in it. It talks about a program to look at our worth, how we define ourselves, how you look at opportunity differently. To your point, it's not a box where you start at night shift and you work your tail off, and then you get promoted to days, and then you work your tail off, and then you look forward to retirement. That there are so many opportunities within nursing that you could take a look at. And I always start with the premise that in order to get through nursing school, you're pretty smart already.
Mm-hmm.
And so the basic entry level of a nursing degree is you're smart. You can do a lot of things with your degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and grit and resilience and
Yeah,
all those other pieces
right,
that you
right,
need to get through
right,
that education program. So,
right.
um, yeah, I think the writing was on the wall. I mean, even when I went to nursing school, however many years ago that was now, but they talked about the baby boom, and they talked about what this is going to mean for the profession, as nurses are going to be retiring in a mass amount, plus the patient age, right? So we're going to be looking at
Mhm.
a higher volume and more chronic illness. And yeah, nobody well predicted what was going to happen in 2020, but it's kicked it over the edge for sure, because now we don't just have that to deal with. We have the huge numbers of nurses leaving because of burnout, because of moral distress. We
Mhm.
have nurses being fired when we need them the most.
Yeah.
And so the whole thing is really quite mind-blowing what is happening. And the media doesn't portray it in the way that is accurate. Nurses are not doing well. They're
Mhm.
not doing well. I mean, people don't come to me when they're well, but at the same, so I know my view is a little skewed, but at the same time, the sheer volume of nurses that I just one person talk to, that are struggling, and not just in a small way, in big ways.
Mhm.
This is not sustainable. And
Mhm.
I've been saying now for a while, this is like final straw kind of time. The
Mhm.
system is coming down, it is
Mhm.
crumbling around us, and it's going to take a lot of really good people with it,
Mhm.
if we don't start doing something different. So
Mhm.
maybe you could share with me, and the listeners, like, what do you think needs to shift? What are some of your insights into what needs to change in the culture of nursing, or the profession, or the education, or any of those levels?
Well, we do. I used to think about women who had nurses who had 4-year degrees that would go into this archaic patriarchal system of signing up for a nursing union in order for some man who doesn't understand nursing to speak for us. And that started a long time ago. And in fact, I thought over the years we'd figure that out and we'd actually get away from unions. But because of COVID, the numbers are higher than any other profession that is unionized. So we've gone the opposite direction. We're now at about 30% in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're letting somebody else speak for us. And, I want the women. And so I did some history, and one of my presentations that I do, a webinar, is on the history of healing. How far back we go to women who were healers, herbalists, witches. And, what did we do? What did history tell us happened to those women who were powerful and who were healing and who were too much to deal with? And that's where we are again. We do not, the other degree that compares to nursing to me always was engineering. It takes a 4-year degree. Most of engineering at the time when I went to nursing school was male dominated. They contract for themselves. They start their own businesses. They go out and they tell people how much they're worth.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we do this? Now we have a problem with traveling agencies. So traveling agencies in the state of Florida, there is a huge lawsuit that agencies are exorbitantly raising their prices because of COVID, because of the crisis that we're in. And the last I heard with one contract we had locally was a nurse was being hired at $185 an hour. Now that was the agency price. The nurse was going to get, about, I don't know, 4,000 a week or so. So about half what the agency was going to get paid. Why do nurses go to agencies? They go to an agency or they go to a union. Why don't they just quit and write their own contract and come back and say, I'll work for this rate and I'm only going to do 6-hour shifts. And I've got a partner who will do the other 6-hour shifts. We just have to stand up and start speaking up and not letting people tell us to shut up and sit down.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah, can we just frame that? We need to stand up and speak up instead of letting people tell us to sit down and shut up. Yeah. And is that because we are predominantly women?
I believe
Probably.
so.
Yeah.
I believe so. I
Yeah.
mean, look what happened our history, to your point, collective trauma repeats itself. Our history is you speak up, you're a hysterical woman and you get, hysteria. The diagnosis of hysteria only went away in 1990.
Mm.
And
There's
what is,
there's a
and
Sorry.
No.
Sorry. Whoever's editing can cut this, but I was just going to say, I don't know if you've ever read the book, The Patriarchy Stress Disorder,
No.
but it's a great book. And she uses this line, and she says, they used to burn us at the stake, now they just hand us the torches. And it's like a gut punch every time I say it or hear it, because it's so true. It's like, yeah, they used to just shut us down when we would speak up and get excited about things and want to create change and, have a voice or any
Yeah.
kind of anything besides this little shell of a, do as you're told, be quiet kind of existence. And now, sure, be loud, do whatever, say whatever you want to say, but we're not going to ever give any of that, right? So you're just fighting, 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 and
Hmm.
ending up that we are so exhausted and so overwhelmed and burnt out, and just being pulled in so many different directions with nothing ever seeming to get better. It's
Hmm.
just, yeah, the whole thing is quite, it's quite mind-blowing. I know I said that already, but it really is.
Yeah,
um
yeah, it is. It's really, and it is our problem to fight. But I mean, I even think about why are there only 12-hour shifts? Why are there only 10-hour shifts? Why do you have to clock in and clock out? We do not act like professionals. We
mhm.
allow other people to train us to be grateful that we could do a 12-hour shift, and then we're in mandatory overtime for another 10. It's it's mind-boggling, and it's time. It's
Yeah.
time to just stop.
Yeah. So what do you propose, like, for the nurses out there who are in it and feeling a lot of hopelessness? Because, it's one thing for us who are on the outside to say, we need to stop. We just need to stop letting them treat us like this.
Right,
But
right.
when they're in there, and like you
Yeah,
talked about, like the demands and the kids in university, and all those pressures and expectations, what do you scale it back to? What would be one or two pieces of advice you could give those nurses who
yeah.
are in that place?
Well, I mean, it's really hard because the minute you start talking about quitting anything, your paycheck, you have a mindset that you went to school, you got a job, you're going to get a paycheck, and you're going to retire someday. It's super hard. I think the younger age group is more willing to listen to what the options are. But just like collective trauma, collective bargaining is very powerful. And I'm not talking about unions. I'm talking about an entire unit of nurses that are specialized. Recently, there were 20 some nurses that were all certified to be infusion oncology nurses. Very high skill set. You could not walk out and replace those nurses quickly. They hadn't been heard for years. They demanded simple things like overtime if they were traveling to another clinic, or a hotel if it snowed, so they weren't driving in a dangerous time. Really simple things, but they were demanding these things from a patriarchal CEO, director of human resources, all men. And they're just like, little ladies, you're just infusion nurses, and they were going to go to the union. They dropped their cards. They were finally had it. They were an outpatient infusion suite that made most of the money for the hospital. So I heard about this, and I was on the other side of it, and I brought them together, and I said, I don't care if I lose my job. Don't do this. Get together as a group. This has gotten out of control. Make your demands heard. Don't go to the union to have somebody speak for you. You do it. And they all went to dinner one night, and they took a vote, and they came back and met with HR and said, we're not doing this, but this is what we're going to demand, or we're leaving. Some of those nurses got 16% pay increases. That's how far off they were. They weren't asking for the moon. They were asking to be treated fairly.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is happening is the environment. Why on earth would anybody expect a nurse to go into a COVID positive sick patient without proper PPE? Why would anybody expect a nurse's body to handle more than 12 hours shift and be safe?
Mm-hmm.
They're treating us not like human beings, to your
Mm-hmm.
point, but
Yeah.
we're allowing it.
Yeah.
And they do scare us a bit, or hold our compassion and our empathy hostage, because the patients are in the middle of that. But we're our licenses too. So what happens if we're tired and we're crabby and we're mean, and we have a license at stake that we earned ourselves, that's registered under our name.
Mm-hmm.
I want nurses to start getting mad and just like make a plan, do something different.
Yeah.
But it's hard. Those one or two things, that's what I try to teach. Is it starts with you and your ability to define your worth and to know what value you bring, and to know that you have a right to be happy and content in your job. And then, start your own business. I have different options. I have a list of 19 different kinds of nursing careers that people can have with a 4-year degree. Start your own business. Go back and contract with don't go to a travel agency. They're going to fly you all over the place, and you're going to be away from your family and living in a hotel or some strange place. And there's something in the middle of that. There's something before you decide to do that, but they think that's their only option.
Yeah.
And a travel agency started with one nurse who decided, I kind of want to travel. I think I'll call Hawaii and see if they need some nurses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It takes it takes creativity, thinking outside of the box that we have been stuffed into for so long, which is hard. I'm not trying to minimize the difficulty of just even being able to see potential,
Right.
especially when you're in such a pit of despair and hopelessness.
Right.
But there is so much more. And there's one nurse on Instagram. She talks about the whole life nurse, and I think all nurses should follow her. She's got great content, but she talks about being the CEO of your license instead of someone else dictating to you what your career is going to look like and what your worth is, what your value is. Is you say, no, this is where I'm at. I totally agree with you. I'm totally on the same page. As a part of the Nurse RX program that I do, a big part of it is looking at our worth, kind of throwing down and defeating these shame demons that are telling us that we should be grateful, that that we should feel guilty if we're not showing up for our patients and our colleagues, and all of those pieces that keep us stuck, is taking them and bringing them into the light. Let's talk about these for real and share about how this is impacting every one of us. And then let's put it to bed so that we can move past it.
Yes.
Because until we recognize our worth, we won't do anything different. Until we prioritize our needs, we'll just keep spinning our tires until our body responds in a similar way, right? Where it's like, no, enough's enough. Time off work, and then what do? We just go right back into doing the exact same thing. So it's the whole cycle has to change, and I agree, it starts with us. It's and the ripple is going to spread from there, right? The more of us who stand up and say, no, this isn't okay, and start to really set boundaries and prioritize our needs, then it spreads, right? Like those younger nurses are going to see somebody else doing that and think like, well, if she can do it, like, so can I, right? Like, this is powerful. And I talk about, like, we need to change the idol of nursing. Instead of it being, burned out, just, burning both candles at the candle at both ends, and just pushing ourselves and give. And like this exhausted nurse is somehow something that we want to idolize and work towards being. We need to shift that. Like the idol is the nurse who says, no, I work this amount of hours. My shift is done. I'm going home. I have a family. Like, you'll still pay me. I missed my breaks. I'm getting paid for that. Like, to have that kind of, not aggression, but assertion of our worth and what we deserve. So, but that takes, and I'm sure you and I both know this as a personal story too. It takes a lot of work to build that kind of empowerment inside of us in order to stand for ourselves. So
yeah, it does. But I like your collective. And the other thing is that 500,000 nurses that are gone, that's always bothered me. It's like, they have so much knowledge and so much to bring and offer the younger nurses. It's 500,000 women, or, mostly. And they're gone, and they're burned out, and they're tired, and they're like, I did my time. It's like a prison sentence. And that's a shame too. So there's a focus there for me, at least, on those nurses that potentially have a lot to give younger nurses in a different way. And, our own, well, at least the state systems how you decide what your accreditation is and how you get a nurse on board and how, what they have to go through. Why on earth do nurses have to, spend thousands of dollars? What is it, about $200,000 to get their doctorate so they can teach younger nurses, younger women? It's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. It's like and you don't get paid to do that. You don't get that reimbursed, and you're not going to make anywhere near what you would make as just a normal nurse. So why would anybody go into being a professor? Mm-hmm. So everything is broken.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sure is. Yeah. Let's there's one question I always like to hear people kind of toy with, but if you could speak to yourself back however many years ago, right, as a brand new student, maybe, what would you say to her? What would be your advice for her just getting started?
My advice would be to exactly what you said. You do the work on yourself first. You understand your value, your worth, your story. So go back to your childhood and learn your story and why you are built the way you are and what kind of personality do you have and what suits you and why. So it's really owning your story and your brand first. And I think they should teach that in nursing school. Mm-hmm. I'm coming out of this with my tools that I know. These are the things that are going to trip me up. These are the things that I have to watch out for because, I grew up in a family where everybody yelled. And so authority, if anybody like a doctor comes and they have more authority than me, then what do I do? Like, do I clam up? Do I, understand that I'm going to shrink and, so it's practice and understand your body and your personality. And then along with that, we all put our pants on the same way. I mean, this whole idolizing what we look like Florence Nightingale, we need a new idol. We need a new idol. And this doctor-nurse relationship, I'm about tired of hearing that doctors are abusing nurses. What's that about? Mm-hmm. Why do we allow that to happen? Mm-hmm. So it's really just communication skills, leadership skills, understanding yourself. And I would say be a lot kinder to yourself. I would say that to the little girl. Mm-hmm. And that guilt, the perfectionism, the I have to do it all, or nobody's going to see me. That was my issue. I was one of 4 kids, and I just had to do all the time so somebody would notice me. Mm-hmm. So it's just learning about yourself at a younger age. I think I wish I had done that.
Yeah, that's powerful. A lot of the comment on that question is like self-care, right? Looking after yourself. But this is the first time someone has said like to get to know yourself before you get into this, and actually probably it applies to any profession, anything, right?
Yeah.
I think they should be going through this kind of stuff in high school with kids, like giving them opportunities to talk about their experiences as kids and, and to have an understanding of trauma too at a young age and the impact that plays. And not just big trauma, of course, that's not what I'm necessarily talking about. It's all those little things that build up over time. Mm-hmm. So tell us how can we, see more of you? Is there, you talked about the workshops that you do, and how can people connect with you if they wish to?
So I have a burnout assessment. So it's on spinsaversword.com. That's my website. I do have my podcast, Dear Spin Sisters, and it's changed its flavor a bit to talk more about nursing. I am on LinkedIn and do a lot of article publishing and speaking. So mainly my website and connecting that way. And then the classes that I started, it's more around exactly what we just talked about, getting to know yourself first, even no matter what age you are. But also playing with this idea that this profession, when you do your original testing in high school, it's one of the professions that requires, or at least looks at, right and left brain equal dominance, that requires both your right and left brain to be a good critical thinking nurse. With the way that technology has changed our profession and the way that, institutions, the hospital, the really sick people, I think that our right brains have been not damaged necessarily, but underworked. So our creative, artistic side that is also that entrepreneurial side and also that, innovative side has kind of been shut down a bit. And so some exercises around how do you get back into that right brain dominance so that we're back to the art of nursing instead of the, science of nursing. So that's some work I'm doing. There's some tests you can do to kind of figure out right now as a nurse where you're dominant and how you're kind of thinking day to day and what you can do to practice getting that right brain stronger, because there's a purpose to that. So it's not just I get a paycheck. It's what is my calling? What is my purpose for being here? Is it to heal people? Is it to get a paycheck? Is it to clean up after people? Is it to get yelled at by a doctor? So that's more what I'm doing with my workshops. And I have a new one starting. So I've been doing these webinars and letting people know that they can get on my website and set up an appointment. So spinsaversword.com /schedule. And I do a 30-minute free consult to talk to people about where they are right now with their careers. I want to know that people know they have a lot of options. And you're right. It's hard when you're in the trenches and you're exhausted and you don't know what you're going to do. It's hard to think and imagine what your life could be like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'll make sure that I put the link to that in the show notes, as well as for your book, The Nightingale Gene, just to recap that for everyone, and a link to the podcast as well. And I just want to thank you so much for being here with me and for sharing your story and your passion and your insight and everything. I am so blown away with how many powerful women I have encountered since starting to do this work as a coach with nurses. And it feels hopeful for me, because it in the beginning, I think I felt kind of like, who the heck am I? How am I going to make any kind of change in this so messed up, broken system with so many hurt, struggling people? But there just seems to be more and more nurses coming out of the woodworks who are saying, I want to be in a similar place, or I already am supporting nurses in this way. And I think that is just really, it speaks to our resilience, and it speaks to our love for each other too, and how we don't just care for patients, that we really do care about each other. And I think it's so exciting to know just of another resource for nurses out there across. I'm sure it's not just for United States. So thank you again so much for being here. Yeah.
Great. See you later.
I personally want to thank you for taking your time to listen to this podcast. It is my truest honor to sit with these nurses and witness them tell parts of their story. We as human beings have a deep need to be seen and heard, and this is my way of helping nurses in particular find their voice. Please know that the opinions shared in this podcast are those of the individual sharing them and not a reflection of any employer or regulatory body. We are sharing our truth, and that may not always resonate with you, but I'm guessing if you're listening, that something has rung true for you in this podcast. Our stories offer healing and create connection, two things that we as nurses need as we navigate the jungle of a healthcare career. So thank you for being witness, and if you feel inclined to reach out to the guest on today's episode to offer validation and appreciation, you can always find their contact in the show notes, as well as other links to the offerings of Sandra Payne Wellness. If you'd like to be a part of the community, join our private Facebook group, Surviving Nursing. And if you'd like to share your story on the End the Silence podcast, be sure to reach out. When we can come out of the shadows and into our light, we can create the change that is needed. And when we do this work together, we are so much stronger. Thank you for listening.